Hello, friends. Engage has released a new paddle, the Pursuit Pro1. It's their first paddle with a curved top instead of their traditional rectangular shape. And they've introduced a new core. This release comes a little more than half a year after their last release, the original Pursuit Pro line. Last year was a wild ride for Engage and their consumers. They first released the Pursuit Ultra series in mid-2023, which ended up being a flop. But they regrouped and released the Pursuit Pro series in September, which was a hit, and rehabilitated Engage's reputation because the paddles came with a significant power upgrade and got great spin. Let's take a look at the Pursuit Pro1 and break down all of the performance metrics like spin, hand speed, control, power, and pop. And at the end of the video, we'll see how everything comes together on the court during gameplay and which type of player this paddle suits best. The Engage Pursuit Pro1 costs $260, and you can drop that down to $208 with the code JOHNQ. As I mentioned in the intro, the Pro1 is Engage's first paddle with a curved top. It's gently rounded, so a slight convexity along the top of the paddle, similar to Yola's Aero Curve introduced 2 years ago, that's become a popular shape for many paddle brands since. This is an elongated paddle measuring 16.5 inches long by 7.5 inches wide with a long 5.875-inch handle. There are two options for thickness, the 13mm Pro1 and the 16mm Pro1 6.0. To me, this is a really confusing naming system, designating their standard 16mm core with another unrelated number, 6.0, and then just leaving their thinner core with a non-standard 13mm thickness without a qualifier. It doesn't make sense to me, but hey, it's what we've got to work with. An important thing to note here is that the handle circumference is uniform across these two thicknesses, so a 4.25-inch circumference for both the thicker and thinner paddle. This will be a welcome feature for people who did not like the thicker 4.5-inch handle circumference on the 16mm original Pursuit Pro paddle. Also, they've improved their handles by covering the exposed core along the side of the paddle with a thin metal strip. This goes a long way in making the handle feel more quality, even over their last release, the Pro series, which had a softer plastic strip, so you could still feel the polymer under the grip on the older models. Another thing to note here is that the thinner paddles have a glossy edge guard like all of the other Pursuit models, but the Pursuit Pro1 6.0 with the thicker 16mm core now has a matte black edgeguard. Personally, I much prefer the matte edgeguard because it has a more quality look and it doesn't show off scuffs and scratches as much as the shiny edgeguard. The static weight of the paddles that they sent me came in at 7.7 ounces for both the 13mm and the 16mm option. It's interesting that both of these paddles came in at the same weight, given that one has a thicker core than the other. And it's important to note that these weights are for the light versions. You can also get standard versions, which come in at 0.4 ounces heavier, so right around 8 ounces. All of the metrics I'll talk about in this review are for the light versions. The swing weight for these paddles are 110 for the 13mm paddle and 115 for the 16mm version, falling at the 26th and the 50th percentiles in my paddle database. So these are much lower swing weights than the original Pursuit Pro paddles, which came in more than 10 points higher. This is a huge difference, and it translates into much better hand speed and maneuverability for the new Pro1 paddles. The flip side of that is the lighter swing weight comes with a lighter twist weight, which can make a paddle feel less stable, which we'll address a little later. A swing weight of 110 for an elongated paddle is actually ridiculously low. You usually only get this low with a standard shape or edgeless paddle. For example, the swing weight of the 13mm Pro1 paddle falls in line with the Yola Scorpius 3 Bright, 6.0 Double Black Diamond Infinity, and Carbon 2X. And the 16mm Pro1 6.0 paddle will feel like the Yola Magnus 3, Gearbox Pro Control Fusion, and Volair Mach 1 Forza. These Pro1 paddles also have low balance points, falling at the 32nd and 20th percentiles, which helps with hand speed and maneuverability. The twist weights for the Pro1 and Pro1 6.0 are 5.57 and 5.75, falling at the 11th and 21st percentiles. The twist weight correlates with the width of the sweet spot from side to side on the paddle, and with these lower twist weights, there is also some noticeable twisting of the paddle during off-center shots, which can be shored up with some perimeter weighting along the right spots to maximize twist weight and minimize swing weight. I'll discuss that more in detail later in the video. And again, these measurements are for the light versions. So if you want paddles with a higher twist weight out of the box, go with the standard version, but knowing that they also have higher swing weights. Like most of Engage's paddles released over the past couple of years, the Pro1s are raw carbon fiber paddles with edge foam, but are not thermoformed. In other words, the paddle is laid up and bonded like a sandwich, and unlike thermoforming, it's not put into a mold and cured with heat and pressure. I was curious to see what's going on inside these paddles, so I cut one open and did the same with one of the previous Pro models to compare the two. The first thing to note is that the edge foam does not go all the way down into the handle. It only starts above the neck and shoulders at about 4 and 8 o'clock. On the Pro1 paddle, the edge foam goes all the way to the top, but on the previous Pursuit Pro model, it's only along the lateral edges and doesn't go to the top. Similar to the first generation YOLO Hyperion, the edge foam is only sprayed into the outer honeycomb cells, and it's exposed, so it's not confined in a carbon fiber tube or a seam like we see with thermoformed paddles. The core is made out of black honeycomb polypropylene, which seems to be unique for Engage, at least in terms of its color. All of the other honeycomb cores I've seen are white or off-white. They're advertising a new power core for the Pro1 called the Mach Pro Polymer Core. The previous Pursuit Pros had what was called a Control Pro Black Polymer Core. I can't see many differences between the two cores, although the new Mach Pro core has wider cells than the previous core, as you can see here when you hold them side by side. This explains some of the weight differences because smaller cells make a denser core. Cell size also has an effect on the feel of the paddle, with smaller cells feeling more dense and a bit stiffer than larger cells. So the Pursuit Pro1 gets excellent spin. They do use a coarse peel ply to provide the raw carbon fiber texture, which looks a lot like what most other companies are using on their raw carbon fiber paddles. Spin for the 13mm and 16mm Pro1s come in at 2178 and 2207 RPM, falling at the 78th and 83rd percentiles, and placing these paddles in the top-tier spin category. To measure power, I recorded serve speed with a radar gun and took an average. My average serve speed for the 13mm and the 16mm Pro1 paddles was 56.0 and 56.4 miles per hour, falling at the 85th and 91st percentiles. For pop, I take the average speed of punch volleys, and this puts these paddles at the 80th and 77th percentiles. So what these measurements mean in terms of gameplay and performance is that these paddles score high for both power and pop, all up around the 80th to 90th percentiles. For full swings like serves and drives, the 16mm Pro1 puts a little more velocity on the ball than the thinner 13mm. And this is reversed for pop, so shorter swing paths like punch volleys, counters, and flicks, where the thinner paddle generates more velocity than the thicker one. These power and pop metrics are actually very similar to the earlier Pursuit MX Pro paddles, which were their elongated varieties, so the same dimensions as the Pro1s. So all of these paddles hit hard, but the impressive thing about the Pro1s is that they have a much lighter swing weight than the original Pursuit Pros. So adding weight to a paddle generally adds power, so given that the Pro1s are lighter and have the same power is a nice perk. So during gameplay, I found that the good pop on the Pro1 paddles works well with their fast hand speed, making them more effective weapons during battles at the kitchen. Counters were especially effective because you could get your paddle into position more quickly, given its maneuverability, and its good pop made attacks and counters more lethal. The trade-off with high pop is the tendency to pop up more balls, which usually makes a poppy paddle harder to control. But one of the things I noticed with these paddles is that the paddle face feels less stiff than most paddles on the market today, particularly thermoformed varieties. So this makes the paddle response less rigid, and to me, the softer feel helps with control. That being said, the face is still springy, even though it's soft, so you have to be mindful not to pop the ball up. The sweet spot of the Pro1 paddles honestly wasn't that great out of the box, and the low twist weight causes some instability on off-center shots. So I do recommend playing with tungsten or lead tape to make the paddle more stable and broaden the sweet spot, particularly on the light model. I added 3 grams to each side of the lower half of the edges, which made the sweet spot feel better as a whole without adding too much to the swing weight. So one of the things I noticed with the original Pro series is that the paddle became very unresponsive near the top of the paddle. So the sweet spot drops off steeply as you move into the upper 10 to 15% of the paddle face. Thankfully, this has been improved with the Pro1 paddles, and I felt the top of the paddle was more forgiving and responsive. After dissecting these paddles, this makes sense because the edge foam on the original Pursuit Pros stopped along the lateral edges, but the foam was carried up through the top of the paddle for the Pro1s. So to wrap this up, the new Pro1 isn't an entirely new, game-changing paddle in Engage's lineup. But it is a nice addition for people who want all the power of the original Pursuit Pro, but with a lighter swing weight and a more narrow, higher quality handle. Also, the core has been altered so that it has slightly larger cell sizes, which makes it feel slightly softer than the original Pursuit Pros. This combination of a plush-feeling face similar to older Gen 1 paddles, together with plenty of power and pop, is unique to Engage, and that's probably why they have a lot of very loyal customers. Like I mentioned earlier, the new Pro1 and the original Pursuit Pro paddles have pretty much the same levels of power and pop, and while it's not Gearbox or Yola Gen 3 levels, it's still near the top of most other paddles, including thermoformed varieties, which are usually more powerful than Gen 1 paddles like the Pursuit Pro series. I do wish that Engage would give their paddles a facelift. It's time for some new graphics and colorways because the white target graphics on a black paddle with a black edgeguard and black handle feels very 2022, and in pickleball years, 2 years is an eternity. Anyway, if this paddle is for you, you can take $52 off using the code JOHNQ, bringing the price down to $208. And again, that's a wrap. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you got something useful out of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.